can I work the technology? Always a really good question for me. I'm not an IT person at all by background. I'm a publisher by background, starting off in books publishing a long time ago. So like CTO this morning, I feel I'm very old today, although I'm not 65, luckily. So who on earth are the EIU? The EIU is the research arm of The Economist. You hopefully read The Economist. I'd love to think you don't. If you don't, then 12 for 12 quid, great bargain. Get yourself signed up. The EIU helps companies monitor the world. And so one of the things I found when I joined the EIU a year ago is it's not a publisher. It's actually a forecasting business. So you'll see this kind of thing, bottom left-hand corner here, outlook for 2019 to 2023. We try and forecast what we think is going to happen in every country, in every world, around 200 different indicators. So we try and say what we think is going to happen in the Argentinian election in 2 weeks' time, because we believe that has a major impact on global business. But what we've been doing for the last 70-something years is delivering that content out as reports, and so we sort of feel that we're a publisher. As we move forward, kind of looking at this session, I was reading an Outsell report written in 2018, and one of the CEOs that they interviewed said that everything will change, nothing will remain the same. These were the top things that they thought would impact the information publishing world in the next 10 years. And so I'm just going to kind of talk through a couple of those as they are relevant to us in our business. And the reason why I've got a copy of The Economist up here, this was last Friday's edition, talking about how machines are taking over Wall Street. So around 35% of funds on the US stock exchange are now run by algorithms and by computers rather than by human beings. The trading floors are changing. And that's, there's a huge amount of investment that's going into those systems. And one of the things, I think, for a small organization like us is how do we compete? Because those organizations are our clients. They buy data and information and knowledge and expertise from us, and yet they can deploy at scale far greater amounts of technology than we can ever dream of. So how do we change that dynamic that we have with our clients to become more data-driven? So I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 of these areas. I'm going to start off by talking about the attention economy. This is my favorite slide of the moment. I've used this in 2 or 3 slides this year. It's got nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about, other than I love the ad and this whole idea of grabbing your attention. And that's what we have to do. Brand is no longer the thing that makes the difference. Quality of the content you produce isn't always making the difference. What's making the difference is, can you get someone's attention and can you keep it? And that is something that I think in STM and in other publishing companies we have to understand. Well, how do we get attention? If you're interested, apparently 3 of the top 20 websites in the world are adult sites, and most people spend about 10 minutes on a website, and there are about 1 billion days of collective human time is spent on those top 5 adult websites. So maybe that's the business we should be in, rather than STM publishing. But as we kind of move on, so I want to talk about data. And one of the things I think in my organization when we talk about data is we don't realize what data means to us. And so you're trying to have a conversation with an executive who doesn't actually know how to work a Google Doc and can't open his email, and then you're trying to talk about data lakes. So how do you have those conversations? How do you talk about the fact that data is going to transform? So I've started, you try and bring a bit of humor about it. You say, well, let's talk about a puddle. We can't possibly cope with getting a data lake. We don't know how to deal with all of that massive amount of technology that we have no experience in dealing with. So why don't we just start small? And what the wonders of technology today is that you can just start small, that you can just go and find one data set and try and work out how you can put that data set into a different space and work with it. Some interesting facts about data. So apparently 90% of data in circulation today was created in the last 2 years. So that volume increase of data, that exponential increase driven by all of these applications that drip data, that is actually interesting to my business and to my analysts, because we're trying to understand what's happening in the world. And this world of alternative data is one that takes us beyond the figures that we've traditionally used, like GDP or house price changes. Those are the indicators that most of the analysts in my business will be using to try and work out what goes on. Now they can look at sentiment data, they can look at credit card data, they can look at footfall data, and I'll give you an example of that later, and how they can use that to predict what they think is going to happen in the economy. And so there's this real disruption in the information landscape, and we sort of sit in this macro and industry trend space at the moment. We are trying to work out what's happening to countries, we're trying to work out what's happening to industries, how are they going to be disrupted. But these data sources that we've tended to use, so consumer surveys, consumer data, are all being impacted by things that are happening and data that's coming in from other sources. And one of the ones that we're very interested in is this sort of bottom right-hand corner is around geospatial data and alternative data. There are, one of the products we work with, and we work quite closely with some parts of the oil industry, and by taking the transponder data and by using satellite data, which measures the shadow of an oil tanker on the ocean at a particular time of the day, you can actually determine how much oil is in that ship with some very clever technology. So knowing how much oil is on every ship in the world because your satellite data tells you that, and then using the data that you can get from all of the ports that says how much oil is coming in and out of every port, you can suddenly predict where every drop of oil is in the world at any one time. And how does that impact oil prices, which have an impact on the global economy? So that's the sort of power of the data that we are starting to think about. How do we experiment with, and how do we move forward? So why does it matter to us? And this is kind of the landscape that we have at EIU. We are a business of two halves. We are a publishing business on one side. We write reports, we print reports, we ship out thousands of print reports every month. But we also have a consultancy business. And those businesses are now starting to merge in our clients' minds and in our minds. So we're moving from this one-size-fits-all, you're going to tell you what we think is happening in Argentina this month, to tell me what's happening in Argentina, but I happen to be in the oil business. What's going to happen to my business in Argentina? That's what clients are interested in, which has tended to sit on the right-hand side of our space. But technology is allowing us to bring those things together and to start to create consulting products that are kind of, you deliver a one-size-fits-all consulting, if that makes sense. What's happening is we're sort of, I'm sorry, I can see my slides adjusting. So we're moving from that kind of no customization to full customization, and we're moving from sort of creating knowledge assets to being able to kind of deploy our human capital in very different ways. And that's one of the biggest challenges when you're trying to move your business from a words business to a data business, is you've got an awful lot of people who are really good at writing. You've got a lot of people who are not only good at writing, they're good at correcting the writing. So sub-editors and production departments, how are they going to be impacted by the change? This, talking about completely free and open source assets, this is one of my favorite websites called Unsplash. If you need excellent images for your presentations, this is a great place. I love this photo. I am, in some ways, quite afraid of the enormity of what we have to deliver for the EIU. And almost everything is changing on every level as we start to look at how our business will move from a reports business to a data and services business. The consumerization of professional content is happening. We can see very, very clearly that our business users want to be able to read the information in an instant on a phone. They don't want to wait a month for us to produce a report telling them what we think is going to happen to the Argentinian economy. There's no point in talking about what's happening in Hong Kong and ignoring the fact that there are huge amounts of protests that are going on there, and that is having an hourly and a daily impact on the economy and therefore the wider world. So that's the sort of the enormity that we consider and think about. This is what one of my analyst colleagues will be looking at. This is an amazing image which is plotting 60 different indicators of risk represented by US economic data over the last 30 years. Each one of the blue lines is an increase in the economy, and each one of the red lines is a decrease in the economy. And I'm now becoming an economist, which is quite scary because I never thought I'd get there. And each strip is a different economic factor, an indicator. So this is 65 years worth of risk that you can see here. And these big red lines are kind of major events. So what we would do with that in the past is we would take that, we'd understand it, we'd then have some thinking, and then we'd write a report. And we'd put all of that data and all of that insight, and we'd just put it into words. So how can we start to use unstructured data, alternative data, real-time data, to start to help us understand things that are harder to predict? This is, as an example, this is what we would deliver to you today as Argentina. So you can see there's a whole load of tabs across there. It's a very publishing paradigm. At the moment, we're worrying about non-breaking hyphens. We're worrying about the colours of the tables. We're not worrying about how accurate is that GDP figure and how quickly may it change, and what are the factors that might impact that change. So nobody is reading our content in the way in which they want to consume it. They're trying to get into page 35, and they're trying to get to a specific piece of information on page 35 of that report, and they need it across all South American countries, not just Argentina. They may be in 5 European countries, and they only want to know the information from that. So we need to be able to tailor our content. And this is the sort of thing we are moving to. So this is risk assessment in what we call nowcasting. So nowcasting is something that as soon as something changes in the economy, our analysts are looking at that. They're looking at what's happening when the GDP figures come out, but they wait for a month to then report it and to put it into the report, because the report runs on a print cycle. So as we start to present this, we will start to, and this may go out via Twitter, this may go out, who knows how we'll deliver it, but we can say that at 8:30 a.m. on Monday, on the 27th of November, there was a particular thing that impacted the economy in a positive way, and this is just a mock-up that one of my team did for me for this presentation, that using a sentiment index on the election, we can see that actually something was going to have a negative impact, and that might be following a whole load of Twitter feeds. And what we're telling our clients is these are the things that are happening, and these are the things that are happening today. So we're not a news agency, and we have no desire to become a news agency. But what we can do is we can start to say, this is how it will affect you, rather than this is just how it's going to affect the economy as a whole. So there are 3 sort of lessons learned, I think, that we are going to see changing. One is around creating content. So understanding the use cases are going to become even more important. We have 4 broad categories of users of our services. They go from the CEO, who just wants a big number. They just want to know, what's the impact on my business? Are my profits going to go up, or am I going to go down? And we've got that sort of research analyst who wants to get really sticky with the data, and they want to understand why we think that something is going to happen to a particular economy, or a particular political event is going to have lasting impacts on something. So we need to understand all of those use cases, because we are going to have to start to tailor what we deliver to clients in a very, very different way. We need to observe what they do rather than asking. So we need to change the way in which we interact with clients and the way in which we sell to them, so that we can understand how they use our content, what context are they using it in. Are they sitting at a desk? Most analysts are sitting at a desk with 3 large monitors. They've got a Bloomberg terminal that's sitting in the middle that's ticking over share prices every second of the day. How do we interact and fit into that sort of environment? We need to think about the smallest meaningful piece of information. Some of our clients will only want to know a particular set of indicators because they are in a particular geography or a particular industry. They don't want this kind of volume of fire hose of content that we currently ship out to them in a report every month. And that context is individual, so the difference between what a financial service is, so a particular bank versus an insurance company, they're both in the financial services sector, but their needs of our information can be quite different. So understanding that, we still need to deliver a PDF. They still want to read the reports in whole, because a lot of our clients also hand out these reports. One of their executives is traveling to a country, and they give them some reading material on the plane. So we still have that kind of quite traditional publishing information need. And engagement is critical. Our clients don't want to read what we say, they want to engage with our analysts. They want to pick the brains of these people and understand why they think. What have they been reading that the researcher in their company hasn't been reading that means they think something's going to be different? So more than ever, we need to understand that role of where we play, and getting hold of the data is only the start for us. We then need to think about shaping content and thinking about the user experience. This is some work we're delivering in China for a major retailer. And this is using mobile phone data from Chinese mobile phones, which is not subject to GDPR, so you can do pretty much whatever you want to with that data. It's sold. We are taking geolocation data, satellite data, and this is showing the different habits, because we can tell from what somebody's doing with their phone, where they're using it, the speed at which the phone is moving, can tell you whether they're a fitness fanatic or whether they're just in the shops. And this is Beijing. And this is going to help one of our particular clients work out where they place their stores for maximum retail effectiveness. Where will they make their most profit if they are trying to sell fashion goods versus trying to sell fitness goods? And what we would have done in the past is we would have had hundreds of people out on the streets with clipboards, watching people, seeing how people move backwards and forwards. You can now use satellite data to look at what's happening in car parks, and you can see the movement, and you can see how cars move around car parks. So there's some phenomenal data out there. But understanding and how you're demonstrating accuracy with that data, if you're suddenly starting to give people information that they are making business decisions on, you've got to be darn sure that that's accurate and that you can trace back where that data came from. When someone's reading a report, the dynamic is different because they're reading that and then they're digesting it and they're making the assumptions. What we're moving into now is that we are starting to do some of that thinking for and with our clients. That kind of, again, merging of the consultancy and the sort of the publishing space. So for us, a big thing we need to move into is getting more proprietary data. For a long time, we've been working on data that's available from the World Bank, from other sources, openly published information. But actually collecting and harvesting proprietary data and then merging that with all of the different alternate data sets is what gives us that unique place to be able to help a client and to be able to charge money for the services that potentially they can get hold of this data. They can get mobile phone data, they can get satellite data. What is it that makes us unique and delivers that unique proposition? Automating will be absolutely key, and we're starting to think about that for being able to deliver at speed. And again, making it useful for the individual. So delivering content is perhaps the easiest thing at the moment. The technology has been there for such a long time. You can buy data lakes as a service from Amazon Web Services today. You don't actually need to do huge amounts of thinking compared to, say, 5-10 years ago as to what we had to do. But the thing we're having to understand is that people aren't coming to our websites anymore. We're having to push content out. They want us to deliver content into their data lakes. A couple of slides back actually showed a screenshot of one of our clients' schematics for their data lake. And we sat in a room with 30 of their other suppliers, and they said, this is how we want you to supply data to us. And we were all sorts of different data suppliers. They were going to do the hard work. They wanted to integrate that in, but then they wanted to have a conversation with us about what then happened when they looked at that data in its individual context, but they didn't want to come to our website to get it. So the flexible platforms are going to be absolutely key. The microservices, FTP sites are out, and that's the way a lot of our clients have been receiving data for a long time from us. And don't laugh, because we still FTP Excel Excel is still the language of a lot of financial transactions. As much as you might think there's huge amounts of data in there, Excel is still incredibly powerful in that space. And delivering content in and out of Excel worksheets, I can assure you, is not an easy thing to do at scale. We need to recognize that we are one of many when we're sitting in a room with a client who's got all of their suppliers in the same room and is asking the same things of them. The ability to negotiate, the ability to change the way in which you can have a relationship with that client is quite different to that sort of traditional, here's an online subscription, here's an annual subscription, how much you're going to pay for it, 5% price uplift every year. So those are things that are moving for us. So our kind of content people of the future are not necessarily editors, researchers, analysts. We're a different being to a lot of publishers in the room today. But what we see we will be creating, and we're not there in any way, shape or form yet, is augmented analysts. So the idea that we don't automate our analysts out of business, it's not what we're here to do. What we're here to do is to make them far more enabled to have a wider conversation with the client so that they have more data sets at their fingertips and those data sets can be coming in from a range of different sources, that the automation does some of that data cleansing, it does it kind of pulls things together, and allows them to have a much bigger pool of data to do that analysis on, to work much faster. So data science is going to become a big part of what we do. We employ a lot of economists at the moment. Economists are data scientists for half the price, because they haven't worked out that they're data scientists yet, but I'm sure they are going to very, very quickly. So one of the things I would certainly recommend is as you start to get into data science, is look for who are the analysts in your own business, because trying to hire data scientists is an absolute nightmare. And whichever country you seem to look at, they're all exceptionally expensive and all look about 12, certainly to me anyway. But they have amazing capacities, and they can bring phenomenal things to what you do. And then enabling that kind of continuous assessment and delivering continuously to customers. And this is the sort of thing that we hope and dream for in our business, that over the next 5 to 10 years, that the improvement in NLP and semantics will enable comprehension of a lot of unstructured text, and that we will, instead of being able to sort of say, can you tell me something about Russia, we will be able to answer very, very specific questions, some of which are here. And some of that's already happening. There are startups in this space that we're talking to and working with about understanding how we can use the technologies that they are developing and harness those with some of the insights of our programming people. So we think that the future for us as a publisher is kind of being able to connect industries and companies, to connect financial transactions and projects. One of the most complicated ones, and we spend a lot of time working on at the moment, is something called the China Belt and Road, which is where in the world is China investing? And kind of a lot of it follows the old Silk routes where China invested and traveled, but there's a huge complication of understanding, do I go into business with a company, a Chinese company in Zimbabwe, to build a hydroelectric dam? What are my risks? What am I going to have to worry about? Because I happen to be a French company. And when you're trying to triangulate French employment law with Zimbabwean access, with Chinese funding, and that's the sort of space where this type of augmented intelligence becomes very, very powerful for what we would want to be able to do. And then delivering that out as a range of services, including continuing to print it and deliver it out as reports, because that is still a big part of the USP that we have with our clients. And do we think there's money in this? This is a slide from a report from KPMG earlier on this year, looking at the B2B Information Services. And where we sort of sit at the moment is kind of in this analysis and data space. And where we want to get to is this being part of the client's workflow. And that kind of workflow solutions feels like a space where that's a very, very big move for a company like us. So still very early days about thinking about this, but these are the sorts of things that we are kind of grappling with at the moment. So there are a number of steps to success that we are really trying to understand. I think, like any business, understanding your market, but I think understanding for us, there's understanding sort of a different level. It's not just about the propensity to pay. It's not just about can you deliver something that there's a gap in the market. What are the regulatory frameworks that sit around what we want to do? How do we trade? We are a regulated business. There's a small part of our organizations regulated. How does that work? How does that get impacted? The fragmentation of buyers and sellers as these things are changing. Degree of technology adoption within our client base. Some still want Excel workbooks. That's all they want. That's all they're going to want for other years. Others have got phenomenal data capabilities that make us look like we're in the dark ages. Understanding the micro workflows within the whole supply chain. It's not just about what does the company do, it's what are the different roles within the company, what is their workflow, and how do they need what we can offer. Define clear use cases. I think, again, kind of big part of that agile so development principles, but really, really starting to look at that on speed, and that's a massive, big change for an organization like us. How do we sit alongside static information databases? How do we sit alongside digital products? How do we sit alongside the fact that clients can do this for themselves? And I love agile, but I also like the idea of a minimum sellable product rather than a minimum viable product. That's when you have a commercial responsibility, viable isn't always quite good enough. So again, trying to work out what's the smallest product that you can deliver. Can you work with one client? For us, it's actually slightly easier perhaps to do that. We have some very long-standing clients that we can go in and can prototype and can play in the space with them. So that's something to think about. Some of the lessons that we're learning, quality is key. People just won't necessarily pay for it, but you've got to be accurate. The data has got to be there. Ensuring the meaning comes through. There is a huge amount of white noise when you start looking at alternative data sets and you start looking at sentiment analysis. The clients can find that noise for themselves. They don't need us to find huge amounts of data. What they need from us is to find the meaning in that data, and the unique meaning is really, really important. Automation isn't easy on a budget. And when you work in a small company, that's the really, really, I think that's probably the hardest thing that I am learning at the moment, is trying to automate. We're at the moment trying to automate creating basic content using some online software, and it's just a nightmare because we have a very specific way of doing things and a very specific way of rendering our content, and trying to get an automated tool to speak in our tone of voice and to follow our house style. I can't tell you how hard it is. So that's a challenge. It's not the cost of the software, it's the cost of the human capital to try and work out actually how far do you change your business and your editorial processes, rather than just saying, I can buy a tool, which we can. Quality control moves up and down the process, because if you're moving at speed and you're automating, how much do you double check? How much quality control do you put in versus how much do you leave on the side and just go, good enough is good enough? AI needs to get smarter, needs trust. We're being asked, well, how, if you're going to do this, how do I know that you're right? And that's a really, when you're dealing with a bank and you're putting information into financial services and they're going to make a decision to buy a company or move in or out of a region, you've kind of got to be able to say how good your algorithm is. Good data rather than big data is about having, there's so much mess and noise and rubbish in a lot of data sets that if you're going to be relying on it and you're going to be automating it, you've got to know that you're starting from the right place. Premium pricing. We're finding, our brand is incredible. Our brand opens lots and lots of doors. But actually, if they can get it half the price somewhere else, will they go there? Can they get it for free? Can they do it for themselves? And that's a real challenge, I think, that we all face. Customers are doing it for themselves, and they're doing a really good job. So I leave you with one slide. This photo was taken in 1975, which was I'm not sure, I dug it out my parents' photo album. I'm on the left. And I think my sister was 3, which is why I think it's 1975. That was the year that Kodak invented the digital camera. But Kodak was dominant in film, and in the 1980s, they had a $10 billion company and were bankrupt in 2012 because they were driven by film. And their competitor was not other competitors in film, their competitor was no film. Their competitor was the iPhone and everything else that came alongside it. So sort of 3 questions that we're asking ourselves today. What business are we in? Are we in the publishing business, or are we in a completely different business? And is that where we need to be to succeed? What opportunities does that raise? And this disruption that we are seeing, how can we ride on top of that? And that's a huge, huge question. And what capabilities do we need? Do we need a team of editors, or do we need a very, very different team of people? And I leave you with that lovely picture of me and my bluebells, and my sister with her very grumpy face because she's only got one bluebell. Yes. Thank you very much.